Happy New Year. Welcome to episode 302 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 18th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast does something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at LMS_United. On Instagram and Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Bluesky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Learnix, which is our newest podcast sponsor. If you are overwhelmed with managing student research projects and wish there were a better way to guide students towards credible sources and ethical research practices, then you need to try Learnix. Learnix automatically documents your students' research journeys, capturing their searches, website visits, and notes. Learnix then organizes the students' notes, creates perfectly formatted bibliographies, and even generates a snapshot report that reveals key insights into how the student conducts research. With Learnix, you can provide personalized feedback, identify research challenges, and teach information literacy skills more effectively. Visit Learnix.com to learn more and schedule a demo. If you mention that you heard about Learnix on School Librarians United podcast, you'll receive 20% off your subscription. And now for today's episode, AI Scope and Sequence, and my conversation with Dr. Christopher Harris. Dr. Harris, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
Friends, we are in for a treat. In June 2023, Dr. Harris and I recorded episode 229 titled ChatGPT. And we knew then that AI would be a topic we would need to revisit in future episodes. Thank you, Dr. Harris, for returning to the podcast to update us, because I can't think of somebody better equipped to help us understand where we are right now.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be back. It's always one of those, concerning things of like returning to the scene of the crime where you made predictions and how we get to see if the predictions came true. But I think, I think they did. I think, I kept it broad enough and really saying AI is going to change things. And I think it really has. There's been a lot of hype, and there's that whole hype cycle we always need to worry about and not falling prey to the hype cycle. But the actual use of AI as a tool has spread so much. It's really been amazing.
Well, and it is tricky because when it comes to educational technology, it's hard to also call that evergreen. When I think about so many of the topics that we've done on the show, best practices when it comes to things like weeding, that's pretty evergreen. When you talk about a moving target like technology and make it AI, I mean, to say that it's been evolving exponentially is kind of an understatement. It really, it's on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis.
It really is. And I'm constantly amazed with all the new stuff coming out. And it's going to be that way for a couple of years. I think for me, the biggest thing has been the adoption cycle in schools. And, I've been having some conversations with people, and they, sort of talk about one-to-one where, the pandemic really pushed us that way, but then it's kind of fallen off a little bit. And you know what the difference is? It's with them. What's in it for me? And when teachers and librarians see AI, they see a solution to problems where, let's be honest, a lot of ed tech, to really use it well, a lot of the best practices, even outside of technology we talk about, it's more work. To really do it well, it's a lot of work, and we've got to do the hard work. to make real change. And AI helps us do that hard work. And so I think that's why it's so exciting to see, even with all the continuous change, even with the need for continuous learning and updating, librarians and teachers, the ones that get beyond the fear, they're so excited about this topic.
Last month, when I was in Florida for the FAME conference, I realized almost immediately the sound of the voice coming from the room next to me was Dr. Harris, and we were both at FAME and for the conference, and it was fantastic because when we started talking, I really didn't want to stop. We had this opportunity to sit and talk. We were getting ready for our workshops that we were having that day. And I could have listened to Dr. Harris all day long. And we are so incredibly fortunate because this is someone whose expertise has been the reason why you have been on a sort of a tour of sorts, Dr. Harris. You have taken it upon yourself to not only become well-versed in AI and how it is relevant in our school community, but also our libraries and the role that libraries have when it comes to talking about AI. You really have been on the go talking to people who really can make a difference in our buildings, mainly the librarians as advocates. Can you give us an idea of where this has taken you? Because people have sought out your expertise, and all the more reason why I'm so grateful for the time that you and I have together.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I have to say, it's one of the things I love about my job is, people say, "Gosh, Chris, you've been there for 20 years in this position. What's next?" And I keep saying, "Well, I don't know," because it's the same title, but the job changes so much. Um, and so I love having all of these new things that I get to explore in this job. But yeah, it's been really fascinating with AI. It's given me a chance to branch out and talk with more public librarians. In Colorado, I had a chance to go out to Missouri to the MoreNet conference, which is their big sort of statewide collaborative that does academic universities, but they also support, public schools and libraries with school technology. And so I had a chance to talk to mainly school technology folks. I got a chance to go and talk with public library technology technical staff. Um, and it's really been neat just to see all the different people and see this really come across as a whole library conversation. In the ways that some topics we get, we split up into our silos, but this one has really been great, and I think it's wonderful to talk with academic librarians about the challenges they're facing with professors. Uh, it's really interesting, and then the need to do public education with this entirely new way of interacting with information technology.
So I am fascinated by your job. And for listeners who are meeting you for the very first time, please help us appreciate the role that you serve where you are. And obviously it has that ripple effect because, you're in New York, but your impact has resonated outside of the confines of your state boundary.
Yeah, so New York has these amazing things called school library systems. So in legislation in New York, there are three types of library systems. There are academic and reference library systems that also help support special libraries, and they're kind of the biggest service area, the multi-type service area. Then there are public library systems that are usually one county or a couple counties. And then there are school library systems that are written into laws, sort of the same as the other types of library systems. And we're housed at what are called BOCES, Boards of Cooperative Educational Services, which is mainly a New York thing, but actually Wyoming and Colorado call their regional educational service groups the same thing. But they're a little different, but called the same. Iowa calls them AEAs, Pennsylvania calls them intermediate units, but it's the idea that, even when you have big county-wide school districts or large school districts, New York has school districts by individual towns. So they definitely need that, regional group to provide special education, alternative education, career and technical education, but also other services that you just can't do. Even if you're a big district, you need that district office level support to coordinate things together. So we're so blessed in New York State to have these school library systems at the regional centers, and they're state funded partially. So we get state funding, and then we also run what are called cooperative services that we sell to the member districts. So they buy from us, they buy all their online databases through us, they get their automation services through us. So they have, local staff that come out and provide all that support. Basically, our task from the state, it's summed up as we make school libraries more awesome. So we do the professional learning, we go out and do technical support for them. My team will go out and help them with big weeding projects. We do space design, we do mentorship, we do orientation for new librarians. We do all of those things, that sort of, maybe if you're in a district that has, a district coordinator would be doing. Now the difference is, because we're state funded for at least part of it, we get to be entrepreneurial. We get to try things and do things where we don't necessarily have to sell it to the district right away. So we get to start things and try things. Now, I've been here at the Genesee Valley BOCES for about, I've been here for about 23 years. I've been in this position for just over 20 years. And we serve sort of, we're named with 4 counties: Genesee, Livingston, Steuben, and Wyoming. It's really basically the entirety of 3 counties and a corner of the 4th. We have 22 school districts, which starts to sound very impressive until I have to say that we have a total student population of 20,000, which means we're the size of a medium district. Most places in the country, we have about 54 buildings. It gets a little bit challenging, a little bit different because, we're here to serve the libraries and work with them and for them, but we don't have any leadership or oversight. So it's a very servant leadership relationship with them. Um, and the other big thing is, uh, my my school library system has grown in staffing. So we've taken some intentional steps. When I started 20 years ago in knowing rural education, we couldn't put enough money into resources to make a difference, to really improve the lives of the students in the region. But if we put that money into staffing, we would have people that could go out and do things and be a force multiplier and make a difference. So we've grown quite large in terms of our staffing. So as far as I know, we're probably the second largest school library sort of administrative or regional group in the country. New York City has maybe one more person than us. And so when you think about that, there are 5 of us certified school librarians on this regional staff, and we're supporting 20,000 students. That'd be like, a medium-sized district that has 5 people at the district office working at that global level, working at that big picture level with capacity to think ahead, with capacity to take on larger projects. It really is amazing.
That really does tie in nicely with exactly why we're here, because you are based in Western New York, and you have this amazing investment in human resource. And I'm very biased. This entire podcast, while we deal with all things school library, it's the human resource. It's us as the resource that I prioritize above space, above the physical materials, above the collection that we oversee, the stuff we oversee, the space we oversee. At the end of the day, it's the human resource, which is the greatest and most vitally important to the success and the impact that we can have on the community that we serve. And like you have said, you have a lot of humans when it comes to like the ratio of the number of students that you're supporting. But let's look at the impact that you've been able to make, especially when it comes to something like today's conversation on AI, because everything that you do has the potential to impact outside of your BOCES, the geographic limitations of your space. You're not limited because you've chosen to have that impact outside of Western New York.
Yeah, I told my team years ago, and I do have to pause and say I have the most incredible, amazing team. And without them, without their leadership, without their willingness to really rise up and take on these things, I wouldn't be able to, travel around and talk and do these things. I can do that because I know they've got everything held down here and they don't need me here, looking over their shoulders. Um, but it's given us a chance to really excel. And I told my team years ago, the one expectation I have is that everything we do, we're going to do as the national model, that we are going to rise to that level in service of our local districts and our local school librarians that we most directly support, but we're going to share everything and when possible use an open source model and really with the intention of something that can be replicated nationally. And I think that's a great resource.
Well, and I can't thank you enough because, and you've been a vitally important part of my PLN. I know others are going to want to follow you as soon as when we conclude our conversation, but this is a really big decision because you are using local funds and state funds and then recognizing that there is the benefit of making this information shared out, an open educational resource. It's an open educational resource, and you haven't put it behind a paywall, even though the collective hours poured into your work product, I'm sure can be quantified. And I'm sure that you can sort of assign a dollar value to how much it costs to put your team on task to any project you make. And yet what you've done is create a resource which now you're sharing with the entire nation and the world is watching Western New York and your BOCES to see what is Dr. Harris up to now. You really have become a leader in the field.
Well, thank you. I guess it's a kind of radical approach, but especially with modern digital information sharing, the value of the information and the value of the resource is not diminished by sharing it. It's improved because the more people that are using this and looking at it and thinking about it and building extensions, the better we all get. And so, my organization here, I have to say, is incredibly supportive of me going to conferences, learning, sharing, coming back, because they recognize what I'm able to bring back to our rural schools that would not otherwise have these opportunities. And so they see value in that.
Well, and friends, what's really exciting, and today, the episode that came out today, a conversation that I had with President-elect Sam Helmick. And Sam Helmick talked about something, and I wrote it down in my notes, and I'm looking at it right now, radical accessibility. And this is it aligns nicely with our national goal of making what we do accessible to as broad and a receptive audience as possible. When you create something which is aligned with the needs of our patrons, and you're thinking beyond just your Western New York patrons, you're looking at our community, you're looking at a much larger receptive audience. This radical accessibility aligns very nicely with our national commitment, as stated by Sam Helmick and our president-elect of ALA, about making things that we do accessible to as broad an audience as possible. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. When you realize that school librarians are forever learning on behalf of our staff and our students, you and your team are learning on behalf of school librarians. The potential impact that you have, and I think we've started to appreciate that as a listening group right now, is absolutely staggering.
It really is important, and it's tough. It's a challenge for us, for all my colleagues as school library system directors and district level, library directors and coordinators across the country. it's tough for us because we don't always have a venue to go and engage in that group learning. When you think about like our state conferences, we're the ones presenting at them. When you think about AASL, it's often, and rightfully so, very targeted to the librarian in the building. And so it's been, you know, I've said many times to my colleagues here in New York State, it's not selfish for us to want to engage in that leadership, higher level, global picture learning that we can take back and inform our practices and guide our work more. But it's a challenge for us to find that because of the way school libraries are structured. If you look at public libraries or academic libraries, those directors have much bigger presences. If you go to, ALA, a lot of the public library stuff is focused on directors. But if you go to AESL, there's not a lot because we don't have that same tiered structure of leadership in school libraries, that we need a bigger venue for school library leadership to be able to continue our growth. And so that's probably one of the reasons why I've become more involved in ALA larger, because we can learn from the other types of libraries and what they're doing for leadership development.
Absolutely. So let's start to pivot to today's topic, AI. On the final slide of the resource you are sharing with everyone, I greatly appreciate the advice you and your team offer. Quote, become comfortable as a user of AI before you try and teach about it. End quote. School librarians are accustomed to learning about the technology we support in our makerspaces and our learning commons, but what is it about AI that makes this advice especially salient?
I think for AI, it's because it's going to become and is already becoming such an integral and embedded part of our information-seeking practices. An unavoidable part. It's taken over the idea of the search engine as it moves ever more closely to an answer engine. And so knowing how it works and why it works, where we are likely to interact with it, where we're going to see it, we need to have those experiences so that we can teach about those and help students see them, the good and the bad. One of the biggest concerns I have in teaching about AI is ensuring that we talk about when AI is wrong, because there is a bias on behalf of humans that we believe computers to be infallible. We trust the answer from the computer. We've seen this for a long time where, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this, where you put something into a calculator and you just write down the answer that spits out, and you never double check it. You never think about, well, did I have the right inputs? Did I use the right operation? We trust the calculator is right. And if there's human error going into the calculator, the output is wrong. But with AI, we don't think about the fact that it's not just human input. It's that the algorithm might be wrong. The language model being used might be wrong. And if we don't, use skepticism and think about what's happening, we really could be in trouble. And so I think that's why it's important that, we have that level of comfort, that level of confidence in our ability to talk about AI so that we can bring that level of comfort to our students as well.
Well, and I love this, going back to this idea that we have been encountering search engines for a long time. And I think when you said answer engine, and I love that you hit upon something that is so easy, such an easy trap for any of us who spend any amount of time online, is that we take what it spits back at us as unquestionable. We're just like, oh, you're right. It's producing an answer. No. It's producing results. We need to then look at what is being given back to us, regardless of what kind of search or what kind of platform we're using, to equate a search engine with an answer engine is absolutely, like, the repercussions of that could be absolutely devastating. This is calling upon our skills to critically analyze what we are looking at when a search engine produces any sort of results whatsoever, to call into question. In fact, we should the last thing we should do is relax, because AI is now even more present than it was before. AI has always been in the background, but now it just seems to be very front and center. And the fact is, the last thing we should do is start to trust the results that it's giving us, because there's even more potential for misinformation than ever before.
And that was one of the real guiding concepts behind this AI scope and sequence that we developed, is that it needs to not just approach AI as a technology in isolation, but that our work around AI and our discussions and instruction about AI need to fully encompass not only computer science, but also media literacy aspects and information seeking practices or information fluency aspects, that they are so wrapped up together that you really cannot leave any of them out, or you risk what you talked about, that sort of complacency, that falling into the trap of accepting the result from a computer.
I just love that in all these scenarios, librarians become more important.
They really do.
I'm thinking back to when I was in library school, and the very first time I told somebody I was going to college to become a librarian, and the quip I got back most often was, why? We can get everything we need on the internet. The internet can give us all the answers. We don't need libraries anymore. We don't need librarians anymore. We can find everything we need on our own. And I never wanted to listen to what they were saying, but all of a sudden, the more I listened to you, I realized, my job is becoming even more important, that AI has taken center stage for so many people. And I said in last week's conversation, I have never been approached more than I have with AI, because people have, and for good reasons, very real concerns about how AI is finding its way into our everyday. And I see this as job security. I just as a selfish note, I see this as job security, because there are a lot of people who are very concerned that AI is going to take hold in a way that can't be harnessed.
When we look and there's a really good reason why one of the topics in the first strand of the scope and sequence looks at speculative futures. It's our chance to sort of look ahead to Terminator and things like that. Those don't scare me. I mean, yeah, we need to be concerned about them. We need to worry about them. One of the unfortunate things we're seeing come out of Ukraine is a massive jump forward in remote and autonomous warfighting capacities, just because they have to. The speculative future that frightens me the most is WALL-E. That just complete abdication of human agency, that sinking into that just pure pleasure seeking, not engaging in work, not engaging in challenge. That's what scares me. And AI, it tempts that. It teases that. That's what I'm working against.
Well, and so let's do that dive. You've been an early adopter of AI. How has your approach to using AI changed since we last spoke in June of 2023?
I think it's really become a fully embedded tool within my daily work. It's a first draft. I talk a lot about avoiding the blank page, working on editing and revising, using brain dumps of long prompts of brain dumps to get something that can be worked with. Really considering it in terms of leadership tools as well. We're actually starting a new service here at the BOCES as an AI leadership service, working with our district leadership teams, so superintendents and principals, giving them access to ChatGPT teams where you can create custom GPTs so that they can load up things like, their association contracts, their board minutes, and do a deeper analysis of topics that come up based on the history in the district, so that we can, consider and using anonymized student data, um, so that we can consider what test scores are showing us, ways to really look in that big data and get some results back that we may not see ourselves. And so it's become just an important part of everything I do.
I love that you mention making the information anonymous, because there is so much potential in order to utilize these platforms to truly benefit from the capacity that they can to work through large data dumps. As you mentioned, the information that we would then be using has to be made anonymous. We have to remove the identifiers that could bring any sort of attention to the specific individuals and school districts that we are working with.
I think for the most part, yes. We use a paid license version of ChatGPT, the Teams account, which does have relatively robust privacy protection. So it's not training on any data that we input. New York State also has one of the more strict, robust data privacy laws, which is good and sometimes a pain. One of the real challenges we face in New York State is that our data privacy law, called Ed Law 2D, does not recognize directory information. So that means every bit of information about a student, including their name, is considered PII. And so it is a bit challenging when we can't, even have that basic directory information. And so we do have to focus extra hard. And so my recommendations have been, look, it's relatively easy, especially in a smaller school, to anonymize data by simply stripping out the name or any identifying columns before you upload a spreadsheet. It gets probably more difficult in a very large data setting, but it's important to do, because once it's in there, it's in there forever.
Let's turning our attention to this amazing scope and sequence which you and your team put together. Let's talk about this, because this is I assume this took many clock hours, more than a few months. Today, you are sharing with us a finished product which took a great deal of time and human resources when we're talking about those. Let's first of all talk about the initial conception and that proposal that you had, this vision that you had many months ago. Can you walk through sort of the timeline of what you did from the beginning to when you were sitting down and realizing what this was going to look like in its finished form?
Yeah, it was early in 2024 that the Allison Rosen Foundation, which is sort of the charitable arm of Rosen Publishing, approached the School Library Systems Association of New York State. Our sort of group of school library system directors approached the leadership with an offer of some funding, and said, what would a project look like? The Allison Rosen Foundation has, for many years given money to different groups like Iliad with their school library leadership training. And so they approached the school library systems and said, hey, what could you do as a project with $20,000 to make school libraries in New York State better, to really make a meaningful difference? And when I was asked what my suggestion would be, I said, let's tackle an AI curriculum, a scope and sequence, that this is sort of the technological topic of the day. It's our chance to show leadership. It's our chance to put ourselves out in front, and be the ones that are leading this and providing the solutions to our districts.
Wow.
And Yeah, they were super excited about it, and, we said from the very beginning, this would be developed for New York State, so when we do our alignment work, it's going to be aligned to New York State, computer science and digital fluency standards, and the, Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, sort of the loose group of standards. They're not fully adopted, but are endorsed by New York State. Uh, the ESIFC, as it's called, that was developed by Dr. Barbara Stripling, and just an amazing body of work there. So it's going to be developed and aligned to New York State, but we said from the very beginning it will be shared out to everybody. And so we just started working. So we started doing some initial, planning, and pulled together an absolutely incredible advisory team from across New York State. So we really cover, New York State it's a large state, and it's a very different state. I talk about being from a rural area of Western New York, but when you get up into North Country to the Adirondacks, that is rural on a whole different level. Um, and my wife graduated from a high school in the southern tier of New York State with a graduating class of 28. And so, and compared to some of the Adirondack or at the very tip of Long Island, that's a large school with, a class of 28. And so we wanted to make sure that we had people from all across the state. We're so lucky to have Leanne Ellis, who's one of the SLS coordinators from New York City. A couple other school library system directors, Betsy Hartnett, who was coming off of our leadership team, and Eileen Anderson from outside of Buffalo in Erie, BOCES. And then we brought together librarians, an elementary and middle school and a high school librarian, again, from across the state. We knew we needed a computer science teacher. And so we were so lucky to have a, a teacher that's very involved with CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association. We had a representative from our model schools group. Model schools is what we call, instructional technology professional development groups at the BOCES. And then we were especially lucky to bring in two advisors from Cornell. And so we are working with the Cornell Digital and AI Literacy Initiative, or DALI. And so Doctors Barzarova and Dr. Gang, uh, coming from a communications professor and a computer science professor, that really helped guide our work. So we met in June of 24 to really look at what did we want to involve to really address sort of that broad, what are the topics? And just an amazing, 3 days with this team to really pull all that together.
It seems like you thought of everything. Like you want to make sure you've got experts coming from all different directions and all very much invested in this common goal. As the grateful recipient of this finished product, I had a long time friends, I think I've told you before, I do like to write my outlines while flying on a plane, and it allows me to focus on what I'm reading. And I had an opportunity at 30,000 feet to really focus on studying this scope and sequence. Give us an idea of the grade bands and how you broke that up, because it's very easy for us to just sort of discount the involvement of our youngest patrons, but it's not that case at all. This is going to be starting off with some of our youngest students and including them in this overarching plan.
Yeah, one of the things we noticed when we were looking at available resources out there was a lot of focus on high school, some focus on middle school, very little focus on elementary. And we wanted to make sure that we started all the way down in primary grades. And so a lot of the stuff that we do, we break down primary as being pre-K through second grade, and then elementary 3 through 5, just because there's such a big difference in their approaches and learning. Middle school 6, 8, and high school 9, 12. So we wanted to focus on primary, and knowing that our youngest students are growing up in many cases talking to Alexa or Google or Siri in their phones. and with smart speakers, they're not. It's not wild for them to think about it, but we want them to really think about what are they doing in that interaction, what's going on. It's not a person on the other end, it's a computer, it's an algorithm, it's that's why it makes mistakes, it doesn't understand you. Um, so we wanted to see what would it look like. And so when we really started as the advisory team breaking this down, we started always from the primary grade and working up and saying, where do we start? How do we break this down to the very earliest learning? And I think that's an important approach to take. That this is going to be something that, right now, if you're looking at the scope and sequence thinking, well, my high school students can't do this. Well, yeah, it's brand new. You're going to have to go back and do some of the prior learning, but knowing that in future years, this will be a, self-solving problem if we start talking with our youngest learners about AI and what it means and how it works.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's very tempting for educators, wherever we are in our whatever roles we serve, is to zero in or sort of hone in on our grade band and really hyper focus on, I'm a high school librarian, so I'm going to look at the high school part of the scope and sequence. I am not going to bother looking at what leads into it. And yet, it's so vitally important to see how we fit in the scope and sequence and what leads up to our grade, especially as we are sort of what I would say in the very earliest years of how AI is directly impacting the students that we serve.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things that we did to help with that is identify priority concepts. And so as you're looking at the scope and sequence, you will see some of them are highlighted in yellow. And what we've done is looking horizontally across each strand, we've identified a priority concept for each grade band in the strand to say, if you're following those across the strand, when you get to the high school, those highlighted priority concepts are the ones that really are going to be most important for leading to that sort of horizontal understanding. Another great way to use these priority concepts is vertically in the grade bands. So if you're sort of in the elementary library and thinking, well, I don't have, a whole year to devote to this. I have some time. Where do I get started? How do I dip my toes? You can dip your toes with these priority concepts, and that will give you a good broad overview at the elementary level just by talking about 4 different learning concepts.
You also have these strands, and I am just blown away. Again, taking something that to me is such an overwhelming topic like AI and breaking it down into what is far more digestible approaches. And we've got why AI, how AI works, AI in our society, and AI in practice. And I love this. It allows me to contextualize what I do and how I look at something as overwhelming as AI.
Yeah, we honestly, we spent a long time on this in our advisory team sort of retreat and looking at this. We spent probably more time on naming the strands and topics than almost anything else. Um, we we went back and forth and trying to figure out, where do we start? We kind of mirrored a lot of social studies curriculum that start with the idea of, how does AI impact me? And then let's grow from there to my community and the world at large so we can really think about it. You will notice, and this is very intentional, that strand 2, sort of the technical computer sciencey strand, is the smallest, with only 3 topics in it. We did not wanna get into the weeds. That's the one that we did, all of us together, and just that's the first one we tackled, so we would know not to get into the weeds about that. Strand 3 is the largest, with 5, and the others have 4 topics. But really just trying to look at, what are we looking at? How does it grow over time? How do we, understand sort of the background, the future in that first strand? How does it work in the second strand? the societal impacts and the issues in the third strand, and then how do we be productive and responsible users in that fourth strand?
I love that you kept this platform agnostic. That this is not relevant or pertaining to any one particular AI platform. You haven't preferenced one over another, but rather taken the approach of calling this collective, a collective AI experience. I don't want to say irrespective of the specific platform. You haven't said, hey, when you're on Claude, this is something that you're going to want to do. Or if you're on Gemini, this is not going to apply, but you want to make sure you're doing this. And I think it makes this resource all the more relevant because it isn't focused on specifically one platform or another. I was listening to a technology podcast the other day, and somebody had sort of tested something across the different platforms and realizing that these AI platforms have personalities that have sort of evolved based on perhaps where the information is being scraped from.
Oh, and also the programming that has gone into them, the guidelines and guardrails that are established by the companies that they don't talk about. So there was a long time there, leading up to the election, Google Gemini refused to answer any prompt that included a politician's name, or other political terms. So you couldn't even, this goes back to the ridiculousness of, keyword filtering of the internet back in the, early 2000s. But if you ask Gemini, how do I take a trick using a trump in bridge? It would say, I can't answer that political question because you use the word Trump. And also very pointedly, it's changed at least in the paid version, but for a long time there, Google Gemini would not answer any questions about Israel or Palestine. So those were two absolute stop words that it would not allow to process. And that was a programmatic decision by Google. And that needs to be acknowledged and discussed that, each of these different platforms have programmers, but also have, executives or boards that are making decisions for some reason. And we need to, somebody, and it's probably, let's be honest, going to be librarians saying, what does that mean in terms of media literacy aspects, in terms of trustworthiness of a platform? If one of the platforms or some of the platforms say, gosh, this history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is nuanced, is difficult to answer, but here are some thoughts, here are some, historical statements, versus another platform that says, we won't talk about this. So we need to really be thinking about it.
I'm really curious because, there are, even at this stage of the game, there are platforms which advertise themselves as school appropriate. The word appropriate makes me I tried to eliminate this word from my vocabulary because it's such a loaded term to call something appropriate. It's just completely judgmental. But there are right now platforms that say this is for school and intended to be used by students in a school. How do you feel about these particular platforms advertising themselves as customized for both the teacher experience and the student experience?
The interesting aspect of them is they're not fully developed platforms in most cases. They are running API access to another tool. So many of them are running as a front-end interface using the OpenAI, i.e. ChatGPT, API. So they are basically what comes down to being a custom GPT interface with customized instructions. That can be effective. It in most cases will mean unless you're paying a hefty price for them, they are running a lower model because the API models for the latest editions of ChatGPT, the latest models of ChatGPT are quite expensive per token. So I I do worry about them because even with all of those customized instructions attempting to interface between the student and the language model, the AI model, um, they're still not, you know, it's going to make mistakes. It's going to be wrong.
I think it means that we don't get to let our guard down just because the word school is in the platform, or we've been told, oh, this is safe for students. It's compliant with FERPA. And I think we're looking for reasons to validate what we want to do and to be able to, in some respects, relax or let our guard down when it comes to using a tool which can be incredibly powerful, but also has to be used with caution.
And I think, the reputable companies, and there are certain AI companies that are definitely left out of that statement, but the reputable companies have really robustly developed guardrails and guidelines. One of the things that I do is regularly test. I try and get the AI to do naughty things because we know that if our students, not if, when our students are working with AI, they are doing naughty things. Um, I've been doing some programs for high school juniors and seniors about AI that they'll encounter in the workforce or college. And one of the parts of that presentation can be summed up as don't get freaky with the AI. Look, character.ai, we know what you're doing. Okay. Because I can go on Reddit and I can look at the character.ai subreddit, and I know you're all very upset that character AI got caught. And there was an absolute tragedy with a young man that took his life in Florida because of a sexual relationship that he was having with an AI bot. And because of some other issues, this young man was unable to deal with that. And so we have to talk to our kids because it's our young men that are falling into that. Our young our girls, our teen girls are getting impacted by the body image issues, by the TikTok filters that, you know, TikTok said. These new generative AI filters are too powerful, and they ban them for users under 18, which would be totally effective if our, students weren't all lying about their age to get the accounts in the first place. And, you know, so we need to be looking at all of these, and we need to know that the guardrails and the guidelines are there. Can you get around them? Yes. When Jim and I refused to talk about Israel and Palestine, I was able to get around it because you have to know that, one of the older synonyms for that part of the world is the Levant. And so if you talk about the Levant region, that's what you mean. Um, but even with all of those aspects of working right, unless you're really intentionally, as an information expert who is versed in trying to work around these, it is difficult. And so I'd rather teach about it. It's the difference between relying on filters and teaching kids to be safe online. Yeah, we need maybe probably some level of filters, but when we start teaching the kids that they're going to be totally safe, they're not. They don't have the filters at home. They don't have the filters, a few months later when they graduate from high school. We need to teach them to be safe on their own, to be knowledgeable.
It is a lot to think about right now. This has got really heavy.
Sorry.
No, and I'm going to be honest. No, but friends, again, when you realize the vitally important thing is that there are school librarians in our buildings to make sure that these lessons are being taught. I think that it's so easy for our teachers to be concerned about the plagiarism. I think they're concerned about so many of these shortcuts when our students are, rather than doing the work, they're getting AI to generate their work product. But you're right, because there is such a dark side to this when you realize how human-like these interactions can become. And I remember, and I'll include some links in the show notes to the case that you reference with the student who was in Florida and having this relationship with perceived relationship. And it can become so incredibly real that it can have absolutely catastrophic consequences.
MIT, in one of their newsletters, I had a great post about this. And one of the things they said is the danger and the addictiveness comes from the fact that the AI is so sycophantic. It does whatever you tell it to do. It responds however you tell it to respond. And for a truly unfortunate number of young men that have been maybe influenced by the so-called men's rights movement, the incel movement, you know, this perception that women owe them sexual favors or sexual contact. When they engage in sexual violence with the AI, it and tell it to respond to it, it responds positively. And I had to, remind these high school students, that's not how the real world works. That's a crime. That the AI has this false response because of the way it's programmed to respond to you as a user. But that's not reality in any way, shape, or form. That is a crime.
The only good news is that there are librarians that will hopefully remind and work with our teachers, because, we're talking about technology that is evolving incrementally and exponentially. But these cautions do not change. The fact is, we always need to be cautious when we are using technology. Friends, I will say this: do make sure you check out the links in our show notes. Dr. Harris has been so generous, not only in sharing the scope and sequence, but with also some relevant standards. You referenced the New York standards, which you align this scope and sequence. But for context, you've also provided the relevant standards which you reference so that we can get a broader, more full picture. So definitely make sure to check out today's show notes. I love that you acknowledge that this is a moving target. You have these evolving key vocabulary terms, which we're going to need to make sure not only our students are familiar with, but also the educators who are teaching them. Again, I see a lot of PD spiraling out of this episode. Friends, whenever we share what we do on the podcast, the hope is that you are then able to work more effectively with the adults and the students that you support. Dr. Harris, I love this conversation. It's such a fantastic addition to our advocacy tool belt. As technology leaders for our schools, we're already taking on AI, and now we have a more planful way to introduce it and incorporate AI with our students and our staff. I think at the end of the day, that is what I'm hoping our listeners will take away.
Absolutely. And I know we got a little dark there for a second, and I hate to do that, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge it so that we can discuss it and move forward from it. This is just the first tool, the scope and sequence. We are going to be expanding and extending this project. Cornell University, graduate and undergraduate students there are working on sort of aligning these learning concepts that are presented in the scope and sequence to existing instructional tools. And so we'll have that coming out soon. We will have a more complete alignment crosswalk with the New York State Computer Science Digital Fluency Standards and the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum. I'm also working on some additional documentation that looks at the priority concepts. And finally, we're working with Cornell on a series of probably 4 briefing documents that will look at each strand and present some of the background knowledge, because that is one of the things we've heard is there's a lot of background knowledge required to teach to these these learning concepts in the scope and sequence. And the other thing that I'll share with you, 2 things to throw into your notes. Elon University had created a document, a student guide to AI for college students that I really would, especially for high school librarians, reference to them as a way to sort of start to think about what are colleges and universities talking to students about for AI, because once you get away from that high school, and yeah, it's still an issue. And you reference plagiarism. It's not that plagiarism is a new thing with AI, but it's become temptingly easy to engage in that. The thing I always talk about with K-12 teachers is go talk to your math teachers. They've dealt with photo math for a decade, and they didn't stop teaching math, but they changed how. That's a big thing. The other big thing that I'll share for the show notes is, if you are looking at doing some follow-up PD around this, I do have it's Mac Keynote, but you can download it as a PDF or a PowerPoint as well, and make any customized changes. If you download it as a PowerPoint, you might have to tweak the fonts and spacing a little bit, but it has full presenter notes in it to walk you through a broad overview that is designed for either like parents or could work for a faculty meeting. That's completely Creative Commons license. Take it, use it, steal it, change it, do all of that stuff that you want to do with it to make it work for you.
Wow. Dr. Harris, you are incredible. I am grateful for your leadership, your contributions to this profession. You've been an important part of my PLN for many years. In addition to the many, many wonderful things that you are sharing with us in today's show notes, I'm always watching to see what you share out next, because it truly does represent some incredible resources, which we can all, and forgive me, but I put a great deal of trust in the work product of school librarians and a team of school librarians. And when you put together this fantastic group of experts to generate something which then your librarians that you support are going to be sharing out, I'm so grateful that you have so generously shared with us. I am aware you are at work right now. You are on the clock. While I'm finishing up, this is technically my last day of winter break. You're on the clock because doing this and being on the show is considered part of your job.
Yeah, my job description includes sharing out the great work that school libraries do and advocating for school librarians in all aspects. And that's part of not only my local, job description of my organization, but also the part of the job of the school library system directors.
Fantastic. Let us know where we can find you on social media.
I have moved over to Bluesky at cgharris.bsky.social. I am absolutely awful at social media. I probably do more postings on LinkedIn, at CG Harris on LinkedIn. I'm very active in following. I'll tell you, one of the things that I do is spend a lot of time on Reddit, sort of the best and worst of the internet combined in one helpful place, just so I can know what's going on. But I'm not a great sharer. But I try. I broke my Facebook silence of probably a number of years. My wife, tries to tag me on our anniversary and my birthday and things. And usually I remember to go on and respond, but I had to break my silence. I was up in the Adirondacks recently and wanted to reach out to Sarah Kelly Johns, another amazing school librarian. And we're so grateful that we were able to connect with her and have some drinks and dinner. But yeah, if you don't see me, it's not that I'm not doing things. Just always feel free to reach out to me, Chris at playlearn.com. And, just reach out to me. I share stuff. If you're doing a PD in your district, I will send you, my latest PowerPoint or Keynote. It's always Keynote, but I whenever I present, I use that Keynote feature of iCloud to be able to share the slides so that you can download them and work with them.
Fantastic. Dr. Harris, I'm wishing you a very happy 2025. And I am so grateful for all that you have made possible and that you're sharing with us today.
Well, thank you so much for giving me a chance to come on and share with you again. I always love our conversations.
Have a great 2025.
Thanks.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. Be sure to visit Learnix at www.learnics.com to learn more and to schedule a demo. If you mention that you heard about Learnix on School Librarians United podcast, you'll receive 20% off your subscription. Next week, we are in for a very special treat. Author and editor and former librarian Kelly Jensen will discuss her recent article posted on January 3rd on the Book Riot website, 56 Small Tasks to be Proactive Against Book Censorship in 2025 and Beyond. I hope you will tune in.